The clang of the gavel reverberated like a sudden explosion. Two dishonest lawmen occupied the courtroom, a smug assurance etched on their faces, certain they had successfully ensnared another blameless man of color in a false accusation. They perceived it as a guaranteed victory, utterly unaware they had just targeted a seasoned special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Rain hammered down in torrents against the windshield of a 2008 Chevrolet Malibu. It was a bleak Tuesday evening in Fairview, a municipality that had long since relinquished its moral compass to systemic decay and covert malfeasance. Behind the wheel sat Derek Coleman. To any observer, noting the car's weathered paint or the weary lines on the driver's countenance, he was merely another laborer returning home after an arduous double shift. That was precisely the intended effect. In reality, Derek was a supervisory special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, boasting 15 years of distinguished service. For the preceding 8 months, his investigative unit had been meticulously scrutinizing the Fairview Police Department. An avalanche of civil rights grievances had accumulated, mirroring fallen leaves. Fabricated arrests, unaccounted for evidence, abusive interrogations, and a disturbing pattern of racial profiling had become the hallmarks of Fairview's constabulary. However, the FBI required irrefutable evidence, proof that would stand up in court, perpetrators caught on film, documented, and exhibiting unambiguous malicious intent. Derek had volunteered to serve as the lure, as he navigated the junction of 5th and Elm, and blinding cascade of red and blue emergency lights suddenly illuminated his rearview mirror. A Fairview police cruiser positioned itself perilously close to his bumper, tailgating aggressively before its siren emitted a brief, acrimonious wail. Derek remained remarkably composed. He slowed to a stop, parking his vehicle beneath the dim, intermittent illumination of a faulty street lamp. He silenced the engine, lowered his window, and firmly placed both hands on the steering wheel, positioned at the 10 and 2 o'clock marks. In his side mirror, he observed two individuals disembarking from the cruiser, Officer Brad Wilkes and Officer Thomas Grady. Derek recognized them instantly from the extensive case file residing on his desk at the federal building. Wilkes was notoriously heavy-handed, a recipient of numerous excessive force complaints that had inexplicably vanished from his personnel record. Grady, his silent accomplice, handled the falsified documentation to legitimize his partner's brutality. Wilkes approached the driver's side, his flashlight beam aggressively scanning Derek's face, momentarily blinding him. "License and registration," Wilkes barked, his voice laden with unprovoked hostility. He did not inquire. He commanded. "Good evening, officer," Derek responded, his tone measured and deferential. "My license is in my wallet in my rear right pocket. My registration is in the glove compartment. How would you prefer I proceed?" Wilkes sneered, resting his hand casually on the butt of his service weapon, a classic intimidation tactic. "I didn't ask for a speech. Just hand it over." Moving with deliberate slowness, Derek retrieved his civilian driver's license, an alias meticulously supported by the Bureau and the vehicle's documentation. He passed them through the window. Wilkes snatched them, giving the documents only a cursory glance before redirecting the light into Derek's eyes. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Wilkes inquired. "I have no idea, officer. I was observing the speed limit and maintaining my lane," Derek replied. "Your left tail light is flickering," Wilkes stated smoothly. The Bureau's mechanics had thoroughly inspected the Malibu that very morning. It was in impeccable working order. "And you smell like marijuana. Step out of the vehicle." Derek understood the script. This was the critical juncture where a citizen's apprehension would escalate, where an errant movement could be legally construed as a threat. "Officer, I do not smoke marijuana. I would prefer to remain in my car. Are you ordering me to step out?" "I said step out of the damn car," Wilkes bellowed, his hand reaching for Derek's door handle. "I am complying," Derek stated clearly, exiting the vehicle into the biting rain. Before Derek could fully steady himself, Grady, who had circled to the passenger side, was suddenly behind him. Grady forcefully shoved Derek against the side of the Malibu. "Hands on the roof! Spread them!" Derek complied, mentally cataloging each procedural infraction, every unnecessary physical escalation. As Wilkes roughly patted him down, Grady leaned into the open driver's side window. The sound of rummaging emanated from the interior. "Well, well, well." Grady's voice drifted from the cabin. He emerged from the car, holding a small transparent plastic bag containing a white powdery substance. "Looks like we've got ourselves a trafficker. Brad found this stuffed between the driver's seat and the center console." Derek gazed at the baggie. The sheer audacity of the act was breathtaking. He had heard the accounts of the innocent individuals whose lives had been shattered by these two officers, but witnessing the practiced casual nature of the setup firsthand sent a chill down his spine. "That does not belong to me," Derek stated firmly, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "I have never seen that before in my life. Save it for the judge?" Wilkes laughed, aggressively yanking Derek's arms behind his back and snapping a pair of cold steel handcuffs onto his wrists, tightening them to the point of restricting circulation. "You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." Derek was shoved into the back of the cruiser. He sat in the darkness, water dripping from his coat, calculating his next move. The temptation to break character, to produce his federal credentials, and witness the color drain from their arrogant faces was overwhelming, but that would merely expose Wilkes and Grady, not address the rot that permeated deeper within Fairview. Derek needed to observe how the local prosecutors and judges would handle this patently manufactured case. He was processed at the county jail under his alias, enduring the humiliation of the mugshot, fingerprinting, and confinement in a holding cell. When he was finally granted his permitted phone call, he dialed a secure line directly to Special Agent in Charge Richard Foley. "They bit," Derek whispered into the receiver, observing the deputies through the smudged glass of the booking area. "Planted narcotics, resisting arrest charges added on for good measure." "Are you injured, Derek?" Foley inquired, his voice grave. "Just my pride and my wrists," Derek replied. "We let this ride. Let them file the official reports. Let them swear to it under oath." "Understood," Foley stated. "We'll arrange bail through a proxy bondsman. Stay sharp, Derek. Once they're locked into their perjury, we drop the hammer." 6 months later, the air within the Fairview County Courthouse was oppressive. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 302 swung shut, confining the room in a tense, claustrophobic silence. Judge Samuel Wright presided over the proceedings. Wright was locally known as a rubber stamp for the police department, a judge who viewed defense attorneys as an annoyance and police reports as incontrovertible truth. At the prosecutor's table sat Assistant District Attorney Catherine Reed. Young, ambitious, and utterly convinced of her own righteousness, she reviewed her notes confidently, considering this trial a straightforward, open and shut case, a routine drug bust, a recalcitrant suspect, an easy conviction to bolster her win record. Across the aisle, seated in solitary confinement at the defense table, was Derek Coleman. He had opted to represent himself pro se, a decision that elicited scoffing from the prosecution and a stern, patronizing lecture from Judge Wright. Derek wore a modest, slightly ill-fitting gray suit, embodying the role of a bewildered civilian completely out of his depth. "The state may call its first witness," Judge Wright announced, adjusting his spectacles. "The state calls Officer Brad Wilkes to the stand," Prosecutor Reed declared. Wilkes swaggered down the aisle, his uniform immaculate, his badge gleaming. He placed his left hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and took his seat. He glanced at Derek and offered a barely perceptible, mocking smirk. Under Reed's gentle, guiding direct examination, Wilkes presented a masterfully terrifying account. He described stopping a dangerously erratic driver, speaking of approaching the vehicle and being overcome by the odor of narcotics. The defendant was highly combative, objecting to every lawful command, Wilkes testified, his voice projecting earnest concern to the jury. When my partner, Officer Grady, lawfully discovered a baggie of cocaine in plain sight on the passenger seat, the defendant became violent. He lunged at me, attempting to grab my duty weapon. We had to use necessary physical force to subdue him. And Officer Wilkes, Reed asked sympathetically, were you wearing your department-issued body camera that evening? I was. Wilkes sighed, shaking his head. Unfortunately, during the violent struggle initiated by the defendant, the camera was struck and damaged. It failed to record the incident. Thank you, officer. No further questions, Reed concluded, returning to her seat with a triumphant nod. Judge Wright gazed down at Derek with thinly veiled disdain. Mr. Coleman, you may cross-examine the witness. I remind you to keep your questions relevant and to avoid giving testimony yourself. Derek rose slowly. He picked up a legal pad and approached the podium. The bumbling, overwhelmed civilian persona vanished the moment he spoke. His voice was sharp, resonant, and commanded immediate authority. Officer Wilkes, you testified under oath that I lunged at you and attempted to grab your firearm. Is that correct? That's exactly what you did, Wilkes replied, leaning back in his chair. And you are absolutely certain of this fact. There is no room for confusion in your memory, Derek inquired, his eyes locking onto the corrupt officer. I don't forget it when a criminal tries to take my gun, Wilkes retorted. Objection. Argumentative, Reed interjected. Sustained, Judge Wright said languidly. Move it along, Mr. Coleman. You also testified that my vehicle was driving erratically and that the narcotics were found in plain sight on the passenger seat, yet your official police report, Exhibit A, states that Officer Grady found the narcotics stuffed between the driver's seat and the center console. Which is the truth, Officer Wilkes? Wilkes shifted uncomfortably, a fleeting flicker of irritation crossing his face. In the heat of a life-or-death struggle, minor details in the paperwork can get mixed up. But the drugs were in the car. A life-or-death struggle, Derek repeated, letting the phrase hang in the dead air of the courtroom. Officer Wilkes, my arrest was processed at 11:42 p.m. At 12:15 a.m., you signed out a replacement body camera from the precinct quartermaster, and in that quartermaster's log, which you initialed, the reason given for the replacement was battery failure, not physical damage. A dead battery. Were you lying to the quartermaster, or are you lying to this jury right now? Prosecutor Reed sprang to her feet. Objection. Defense is badgering the witness. Sustained, Mr. Coleman. One more outburst like that, and I will hold you in contempt, Judge Wright warned, his face turning a deep red. Derek did not flinch. No further questions for this witness, Your Honor. Wilkes stepped down, his swagger noticeably diminished, his jaw clenched in anger. Next, Officer Thomas Grady took the stand. If Wilkes was the storyteller, Grady was the brick wall intended to reinforce the lies. Grady corroborated every element of Wilkes's fabricated narrative. Yes, the defendant was violent. Yes, the drugs were his. Yes, the body camera was damaged during the scuffle. Derek's cross-examination of Grady was brutally concise. Officer Grady, you observed the entire interaction from the passenger side of the vehicle, correct? I did, Grady grunted. Did you at any point see me reach for Officer Wilkes's weapon? Yes. You made a clear, aggressive grab for his holster. And you're swearing to that fact under penalty of perjury? Derek inquired, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "I am," Grady stated, glaring at Derek. "Thank you, Officer Grady. No further questions." Prosecutor Reed stood. "Your Honor, the state rests." Judge Wright glanced at the clock, clearly eager to conclude what he presumed to be a foregone conclusion. "Very well, Mr. Coleman. Does the defense wish to call any witnesses?" Derek slowly buttoned his suit jacket. He looked at Wilkes and Grady seated behind the prosecutor, their false confidence radiating through the room. He looked at the prosecutor, blind to the corruption she was facilitating. Finally, he looked directly at the judge. "Yes, Your Honor," Derek said, his voice ringing with absolute terrifying clarity. "The defense calls Special Agent in Charge Richard Foley of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and I would like to introduce Defense Exhibit 1 into evidence, the pristine, unedited dashboard camera footage from my federally issued undercover vehicle." The color completely drained from Officer Brad Wilkes' face. The courtroom descended into a stunned, deafening silence. The quiet in courtroom 302 was no longer merely tense. It was a physical weight pressing down on every soul present. Prosecutor Catherine Reed's pen slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the wooden table. Judge Samuel Wright's jaw went slack, his gavel hovering uselessly in the air. At the prosecutor's table, Brad Wilkes and Thomas Grady sat utterly frozen. The arrogant smirks that had adorned their faces mere seconds prior had vanished, replaced by a pale, sickening dread. The heavy mahogany doors at the rear of the courtroom swung open. In walked Richard Foley. He was a tall, imposing figure with silver hair, clad in a sharp navy suit. He did not walk like a civilian intimidated by a judge. He moved with the measured, undeniable authority of the federal government. Trailing closely behind him were two additional men in dark suits, their lapels adorned with the unmistakable golden seal of the FBI. Foley approached the partition, his eyes fixed on the two corrupt policemen. He pushed through the swinging gate and walked directly to the defense table, presenting a small, black leather wallet to Derek. Derek opened the wallet and flipped it open. A solid gold federal shield gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. He held it up, ensuring Judge Wright and Prosecutor Reed had a crystal-clear view for the official court record. "I am Supervisory Special Agent Derek Coleman of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Civil Rights Division," Derek stated, his voice echoing powerfully through the paralyzed room. "I have been acting in an official undercover capacity under the direct authorization of the Department of Justice, investigating systemic corruption, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations within the Fairview Police Department," Judge Wright stammered, his face flushing a deep, embarrassed crimson. "Agent Coleman, this court was completely unaware." "That was by design, Your Honor," Derek replied coldly. "We needed to see exactly how far the perjury would go, and we needed to see it on the official record. I present Defense Exhibit 1, a thumb drive containing the unedited footage from the multi-angle, federally encrypted recording system hidden inside my undercover vehicle." "Objection!" Wilkes suddenly shouted, his voice cracking with pure panic as he stood from his chair. "Your Honor, this is an ambush. This is a violation of discovery. You can't just play surprise videos." "Sit down, Wilkes," Foley commanded, his voice like a whip cracking across the room. It was not a request. It was an order from a man who possessed the power to dismantle Wilkes' entire existence. Wilkes swallowed hard and slowly sank back into his chair, his hands visibly trembling. Judge Wright, desperately attempting to regain control of his crumbling courtroom, nodded weakly. "The court will allow the exhibit. Play the video, Agent Coleman." Derek plugged the drive into the court's multimedia system. The large flat-screen television mounted on the wall flickered to life. The first angle was from the dashboard. It displayed the rain-slick streets of Fairview. In the bottom corner, the precise GPS coordinates and the vehicle's speed were shown. The Malibu was traveling at precisely 35 miles per hour. No swerving, no flickering taillights, perfectly lawful driving. Then, the flashing lights of the cruiser appeared in the reflection. The courtroom watched in absolute silence as the vehicle pulled over. The audio feed was immaculate, captured by high-fidelity microphones concealed in the headliner. The video switched to a hidden camera aimed at the driver's side window. The jury observed Wilkes's aggressive approach, his flashlight beam. They heard Derek's calm, compliant voice. They heard Wilkes's unwarranted aggression and his blatant fabrication regarding the taillight and the smell of marijuana. Then came the definitive blow. The footage transitioned to a wide-angle cabin camera equipped with infrared night vision. The entire courtroom watched as Derek was pulled from the car, while Wilkes had Derek pinned against the exterior of the vehicle. The camera perfectly captured Grady leaning into the passenger side. The high-definition audio picked up Grady's whispering voice with terrifying clarity. "The camera's dead, right?" Grady muttered. "Yeah, switched mine off." "Toss it under the seat, Brad," Wilkes's voice replied from outside. The jury gasped as they watched Grady withdraw a clear plastic baggie from his own tactical vest. He looked at it, a sickening, predatory smile spreading across his face, and deliberately shoved it deep between the driver's seat and the center console. He then stepped back, dramatically announced his fabricated discovery, and pulled the baggie right back out. Prosecutor Reed covered her mouth with her hands, looking utterly nauseated. She slowly turned her head to face the two men she had just helped put on the stand. She realized with horrifying clarity that she had been used as a weapon to shatter an innocent man's life. The video concluded, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. "That is a complete fabrication," Grady yelled, his chest heaving as he pointed a shaking finger at the screen. "That's deep fake technology. The feds are framing us." Derek did not even look at him. He simply turned to the judge. "Your Honor, based on the undeniable evidence of perjury, evidence tampering, and the deprivation of rights under color of law, the federal government officially requests that all local charges against my alias be dismissed with prejudice." "Case dismissed," Judge Wright said instantly, slamming his gavel down as if it were burning his hand. "Furthermore," Derek continued, his eyes finally locking onto the two pale, sweating men across the room, "Supervisory Special Agent Foley has some paperwork to serve." Foley stepped forward, retrieving a thick stack of sealed documents from his briefcase. He dropped them heavily onto the prosecutor's table directly in front of Wilkes and Grady. "Brad Wilkes, Thomas Grady," Foley stated, his tone devoid of any sympathy. "You are hereby placed under federal arrest for violations of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. You are also charged with conspiracy, perjury, and federal evidence tampering." The two FBI agents at the back of the room moved with terrifying speed. Before Wilkes or Grady could even process the reality of their situation, their arms were violently wrenched behind their backs. The metallic click-click of federal handcuffs echoed through the courtroom, a sound of absolute, inescapable karma. "You can't do this," Wilkes squeaked, his tough guy facade completely shattered as the federal agents hauled him to his feet. Genuine terror began to cascade down his features, his eyes wide with dawning dread. "We embodied the law in this place. Not any longer," Derek stated with quiet finality. "Remove them." The apprehension of Wilkes and Grady within courtroom number 302 was merely the initial strike. As the two compromised officers were escorted out in restraints before a bewildered jury and a horrified local prosecutor, a substantial, coordinated initiative was already in full swing throughout the metropolis. Coinciding with the courtroom revelation, 50 heavily armed FBI operatives stormed the Fairview Police headquarters. They secured critical servers, sealed the evidence vault, and confiscated the personal effects from the lockers of more than a dozen suspected officers. This forceful intervention, personally sanctioned by the Department of Justice in Washington, was executed with extreme precision and unwavering resolve. Upon breaching Grady's locker, federal auditors unearthed the damning repository of illicit gains. Untraceable firearms with obliterated serial numbers, confiscated illicit substances prepared for planting, and a detailed ledger documenting illicit payments from area enterprises were discovered. The repercussions were devastating for the entrenched network of corruption. The local conspiracy of silence imploded within 48 hours. Confronted with the grim reality of spending decades in a maximum security federal penitentiary, numerous deputies eagerly sought to negotiate their freedom. They betrayed their superiors, exposing a vast criminal enterprise involving unlawful arrests, fraudulent search warrants, and stolen funds that reached all the way to the precinct captain. The trial of Brad Wilkes and Thomas Grady commenced 6 months later, but this time it was held in a high-security federal district court. They found no sympathetic local judges to shield them, no impressionable, ambitious prosecutors to exploit. They faced a federal prosecutor who meticulously dismantled their lives. During the proceedings, Derek Coleman returned to the witness stand, this time adorned in his full FBI dress uniform. With chilling composure and analytical clarity, he meticulously detailed the systematic predatory tactics Wilkes and Grady employed to target vulnerable minority communities in Fairview. The defense counsel for the compromised officers attempted to argue that departmental culture had compelled their actions, a futile effort to deflect responsibility. However, the jury repeatedly reviewed the unblemished surveillance footage from Derek's undercover vehicle, witnessing the predatory smirks and hearing the callous whispers. Justice, in the form of the full uncompromising power of the federal government, was served. Both men were convicted on all 18 federal charges. As the federal judge pronounced the sentences, the courtroom was filled with the families of the innocent individuals whom Wilkes and Grady had wrongly accused. You betrayed the sacred trust bestowed upon you by the public, the federal judge declared, gazing down at the two defeated, weeping men clad in orange jumpsuits. You operated not as guardians of the peace, but as apex predators concealed behind a badge. For your heinous transgressions, you will be removed from society. Brad Wilkes was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Thomas Grady received a sentence of 22 years. Their pensions were revoked, their reputations publicly ruined, and they were transferred to entirely separate maximum security federal facilities to ensure they could not reestablish any vestige of their former authority. The ramifications of Agent Coleman's undercover operation irrevocably altered the trajectory of the city's history. Judge Samuel Wright, heavily implicated for egregious negligence and failing to thoroughly examine demonstrably false police reports, was investigated by the State Ethics Board and compelled into an early, disgraced retirement. Assistant District Attorney Catherine Reed, deeply disturbed by her unwitting involvement in the false accusations, resigned from the prosecutor's office and dedicated her professional life to criminal defense, specifically collaborating with the Innocence Project to rectify the injustices she had inadvertently contributed to. Over the subsequent 2 years, the federal government meticulously reviewed every conviction linked to Wilkes, Grady, and other indicted members of the Fairview precinct. More than 80 innocent individuals had their wrongful convictions completely overturned. Men and women who had forfeited years of their lives to incarceration were set free, walking tall as the city dispersed millions of dollars in civil rights settlements. Derek Coleman, did not linger for the press conferences or the accolades. By the time the final settlement was dispersed, he was already in another state, piloting another nondescript sedan, pursuing the next predator, operating in the shadows. He remained an unseen bulwark against corruption, a chilling reminder to every compromised officer nationwide that the innocent individual you choose to frame might very well be the instrument of your downfall when those sworn to protect abuse their authority. It requires exceptional bravery to expose the truth. Agent Coleman's undercover operation dismantled a corrupt system and delivered long overdue justice to countless blameless victims. Retribution invariably finds its mark. If you relished this gripping, true-to-life account of ultimate justice, kindly express your approval by liking this video, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel for more extraordinary courtroom victories.